Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us today. And today we're going to be looking at something particularly interesting, I think, for any of you out there in the fields of economics, sociology, or even political science.
Yeah, that's right. We're diving into an article today that really gets into a question that could reshape those fields.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about a piece from Less Wrong by L. Rudolph.
That's right. And
Now, the big question here is,
the title of the piece is Capital in the Age of AI.
what happens to capital in the age of AI?
Hmm.
So when we talk about capital, obviously we're not just talking about like money in the bank.
Right, yeah, we're talking about resources,
Yeah.
networks, influence, all the things that kind of contribute to power and success in the world.
Exactly. And the author of this article is making the case that the rise of AI is going to completely change how all that stuff works.
Yeah. And basically how societies are structured.
Yeah. So, okay, let's unpack this a little bit. The core idea I think that we're working with here is that AI is becoming like a more and more powerful substitute for human labor.
Exactly. And the author puts it pretty bluntly. He says, the key economic effect of AI is that it makes capital a more and more general substitute for labor.
Okay, so not just robots in factories.
No. This is getting at, AI writing code, composing music, even doing scientific research.
Wow.
Tasks that, we once thought were uniquely human are now being done by machines.
So if AI is taking over all these tasks, that means the power of human labor is diminishing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the scary part for a lot of people.
Yeah, but on the flip side,
Right.
the power of the people who control the capital to build and operate that AI that's going up exponentially.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the flip side.
Yeah, and the article states that the ability of money to buy results in the real world will dramatically go up once we have labor replacing AI.
So what does that mean for the future of social mobility?
Right, like if
I mean, if capital can just buy AI that outperforms humans in every field, what happens to all the people who are, relying on their talent and hard work to get ahead?
right, is that even a viable path anymore?
Yeah, do those traditional paths to success even work in that world?
And that's really the heart of what this article is getting at. The author looks at entrepreneurship, science, intellectual influence, even politics.
Why not?
And he kind of paints a stark picture. He says, let me see, he says, the AIs are better poets, artists, philosophers, everything. Why would anyone care what some human does?
Oof. Okay, so that's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah.
But okay, what about universal basic income?
Right.
That's what a lot of people are talking about right now as a solution to this mass unemployment that could be caused by AI.
Well, and the author does address that, but he injects a good dose of realism, I think, into the conversation. He
Yeah.
points out that UBI is granted by states that have an incentive to care about human well-being. But, and here's where things get really interesting, once AI can do all the labor that keeps the economy going and the military powerful, the state has no more de facto reason to care about the demands of its humans.
Whoa.
So, I mean, you think about that. If the state's power and wealth ultimately comes from AI, then why would they care about us?
Yeah. I mean, it's a chilling thought, and especially for, our listeners out there who are thinking about, power and governance and these sorts of things.
Right. Like, how do we design systems to make sure that humans are taken care of when the levers of power have shifted so dramatically? It's
Yeah.
a big question.
It's a huge question, and the author doesn't pretend to have the answer,
Right.
but he definitely wants us to start thinking about it now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this is, AI, it's not just this technological force.
No.
It's like a social and a political force.
It reshapes everything.
It could completely reshape society as we know it.
Yeah, and for all of you out there listening who are economists, sociologists, political scientists, this is where your expertise is going to become absolutely crucial.
Why? Because we need people who understand these systems to help us figure out how to adapt to this new reality.
Yeah, exactly. We need to understand how AI is going to change the game and, what can we do to make sure that humanity actually thrives in this new world?
Okay, so we've kind of laid out the core challenge here.
Yeah.
AI is changing everything.
Uh-huh.
It's making capital much more powerful.
Yeah.
Human labor is becoming less important, and that has all these potential consequences for power and wealth and even, the future of human ambition itself.
Totally. And this is really just the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
So then the next part, we're going to dig a little deeper into some of the specific paths to success.
Yeah, we're going to look at entrepreneurship, science, intellectual influence, and even politics.
How does AI reshape all that?
So if you thought this was mind-bending, stick around because it's about to get even more interesting.
Buckle up.
We'll see you back here for part 2.
Yeah. Welcome back. So we're really diving into this idea of AI reshaping the landscape of success.
Yeah, so the first area I think he tackles is entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
which is, for a lot of us, especially young people today,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like that's become synonymous with ambition,
Yeah.
right? Start a business, build something from scratch,
Right.
disrupt the status quo.
Right. And he acknowledges that the author, he calls entrepreneurship the technology of ambition for many talented young people.
Hmm.
And, obviously he points out that AI is already being used by entrepreneurs, to be more efficient and scalable.
Right.
But then he asks this really interesting question. What happens when AI gets so good that it can basically run entire companies without any human intervention at all?
Okay, so let me push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Couldn't you argue that, even if AI can handle all the day-to-day stuff,
Hmm.
there's always going to be a need for human visionaries,
Right.
right? Like the people who come up with the big ideas.
Yeah, that's the classic argument, right?
Right.
That, AI can execute, but it can't come up with the ideas.
Right.
But he suggests that there might be a window where human entrepreneurs can kind of ride that wave,
Okay.
focus on the high level stuff.
Yeah.
But even then, AI is getting better at that stuff too.
Wow.
He says, even if you assume that AIs will never be able to come up with ideas and do strategic thinking, humans will only be useful for as long as it takes to translate the AI's superior ability to run companies into superior profits.
Hmm. So for those of us out there who are studying economics, I mean, this raises a lot of questions about innovation and competition, right?
Absolutely.
Like, will we see a future where it's just, a few companies with the most powerful AI that control everything?
Right. The age of the AI-driven monopoly,
Yeah. It's scary.
I mean, that's definitely something that economists and, regulators are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's move on to another area that he talks about, science. What happens to the pursuit of knowledge when AI becomes the primary engine of discovery?
He gets even more pessimistic here, I think, right?
He does.
He seems to believe that AI is just going to be better than us at science eventually.
He does. He argues that the era of human achievement in hard sciences will probably end within a few years because of the rate of AI progress in anything with crisp reward signals.
Okay, so because science has really clear goals
Right.
and ways to measure success,
Yeah.
that's where AI thrives.
Exactly. It can optimize for those things really well.
Okay, but what about human intuition,
Right.
creativity, and science? Like, surely those are things that AI can't replicate.
You would think right, but he actually seems to think that AI will eventually surpass us in those areas as well.
Wow.
He writes, if AIs become vastly intellectually superior to humans, then it is likely that the AIs will also be able to solve problems about come up with a clever idea variety far better than any human.
So, okay, if he's right, I mean, this has massive implications for how we think about science
For sure.
and the role of scientists in society.
Right. Like what happens to all the institutions and funding mechanisms that support scientific research?
Yeah, do they become obsolete?
Do we need to completely rethink everything?
Yeah, it's a whole new world.
Yeah, it's a huge question. And it's not just about hard sciences either. He also talks about the impact of AI on what he calls intellectuals. So, writers, philosophers, people who shape our thinking.
Okay, this is where I get really interested.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even if AI can write, beautiful essays and complex philosophical arguments,
Right.
I still have a hard time believing that it can actually capture the essence of human experience, like emotions, relationships.
Yeah, and he acknowledges that he writes, the work of intellectuals, as I am imagining it here, involves moral judgments and a deep understanding of human nature. And it might be that this is something AIs will never be able to do well.
Okay, so maybe there's some hope there.
Maybe.
But then he goes on to say that even if AI can't fully replicate the human experience, it could still, flood the world with new ideas and ideologies.
Right, and who knows how those are going to fit into our existing systems of thought.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine what that would look like.
It's a mind-blowing concept. He even suggests that the world historic intellectual might go extinct.
Wow, okay, so for sociologists, this is huge, right?
Huge. Like, how does AI influence the evolution of culture?
Yeah. How do ideas spread?
Right. Will we see like a fragmentation of intellectual discourse, with AI ideas competing with human ideas? Or will AI just kind of take over and define our culture?
Those are some big questions.
Yeah. I mean, this is really highlighting, I think, the point that you made earlier, that AI is not just about technology. It's about everything.
It changes how we think, how we create, how we understand the world.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another really interesting domain that he explores, which is politics.
Okay, so You would think politics is like the one area where AI wouldn't have that much impact.
Right. Right. It's so human.
It's so human.
It's all about relationships and power dynamics.
Right.
But he actually thinks that politics might be one of the most profoundly affected domains precisely because AI can reshape those power dynamics.
Okay, so this is where I'm really curious to hear your take as a political scientist.
Yeah.
He seems to think that AI could both empower and undermine existing political structures.
Right. And he points out that, politicians actually have a lot of control over how AI is developed.
Okay.
They get to set the rules, they get to decide what's allowed.
Right.
So maybe existing political institutions will be able to adapt.
Okay.
But then he goes on to say that the real power play in the age of AI might not be to become a politician, but to develop political skills that you can apply in other places, like within big organizations or tech companies where AI is playing a bigger and bigger role.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost like politics becomes this meta skill.
Exactly. And he also points out that AI could make certain types of political influence more effective.
Okay, how so?
Well, for example, if AI is handling all the technical stuff within a company,
Right.
that frees up human leaders to focus on, the internal politics,
Oh, wow.
shaping the direction of the organization.
So even if AI isn't like directly replacing politicians,
Right.
it's still changing how power works?
It's changing the game.
Yeah, and for political scientists, I mean, this is massive, right?
Huge. We might need completely new theories of power and influence in political behavior.
Yeah, to understand how this all works.
Exactly. We might need new frameworks to understand how AI is shaping the political landscape on all levels.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Entrepreneurship, science, intellectual discourse, politics.
Yeah, just a taste.
Yeah, but this is really just scratching the surface.
Yeah, in the final part, we're going to look at his analysis of different potential futures.
Okay.
Ranging from this kind of static utopia to this dystopian AI aristocracy.
And the big question, what can we do about it?
Right. What can we do as individuals, as a society, to shape a future where AI is a force for good?
Right, because the choices we make today are going to determine what that future looks like.
Exactly. So join us for part 3 as we continue to explore all of this.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into capital in the age of AI. So we've talked about how AI could really disrupt, all these different paths to success. And I think now we need to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Like, what are the potential societal outcomes of all this?
Yeah, and the article lays out a few different scenarios, and I think they're really valuable for thinking about, especially for our listeners in the social sciences.
Yeah.
It's not just about predicting the future, right? It's about understanding, the potential consequences of the choices we make today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the first scenario he talks about is this idea of a static utopia.
Okay.
And it's basically this future where AI has solved the problem of material scarcity. So everyone has, a really high standard of living, kind of like a global version of Norway.
Right, like abundance for everyone.
Yeah, sounds pretty good on the surface, right?
Yeah, it does. But as the author points out, imagine a world where everyone has a comfortable standard of living, but where social mobility is practically extinct, the distribution of wealth and power becomes frozen.
Okay, so even if we solve poverty,
Right.
we might end up creating a society where there's no opportunity to get ahead.
Right, like ambition is stifled.
Yeah.
And, he argues that this kind of static utopia, even though it sounds nice, could actually have some pretty negative psychological and social consequences.
Yeah, like what happens to our collective drive if there's no real opportunity for advancement?
Right, and he writes that the only remaining forms of human ambition are playing local social and political games within your social network and class, and consumption experientialism.
So basically just like distractions.
Yeah, keeping ourselves entertained.
Yeah, and for sociologists, I mean, this is fascinating, right?
Totally. Like, what does that do to a society?
Yeah, what happens to social cohesion, to innovation?
Right.
When people don't have that drive to achieve something more.
And it's not just about social mobility either. The author also talks about, the potential for increased surveillance and control in this kind of world.
Okay.
He says, in a static utopia, there is a high degree of social stability. This stability is enforced by the state, which has access to extremely powerful AI tools for surveillance and control.
So basically, we're trading freedom for comfort.
Potentially.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is, and that kind of leads us to the darker end of the spectrum, which is what he calls the AI aristocracy.
Okay, yeah, this is where things start to get really dystopian.
Yeah, this is like A handful of ultra-wealthy individuals control the most powerful AI,
Okay.
and it leads to extreme inequality and maybe even like a caste system.
So instead of moving forward, we're almost like regressing back to feudalism,
In a way, yeah.
where a small elite controls everything.
Right. And the author says the power disparities between classes might make modern people shiver, much like modern people consider feudal status hierarchies grotesque.
It's almost like AI could make inequality even worse.
Potentially, yeah. And it's not just about money, right? It's
Right.
about power. If these people who control the AI can manipulate information,
Oh, wow.
shape public opinion, control access to resources, then democracy itself could be at risk.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought. And I think, for political scientists, this is a huge red flag.
For sure, like, how do we protect democratic institutions in a world where AI could be used to concentrate power like that?
Right. We need to be thinking about safeguards.
Absolutely. And economists, too.
Yeah.
Like, how do we manage the distribution of wealth and resources when AI is generating so much wealth?
Right.
How do we prevent this AI-powered elite from just hoarding everything?
Yeah, it's a massive challenge.
It is, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about a static utopia and an AI aristocracy, both pretty unsettling.
Right.
But he also brings up this other possibility, even more extreme, which he calls the singleton scenario.
Right, the singleton.
Yeah.
This is where AI becomes so powerful that it basically becomes this single entity, this singleton that controls everything.
Okay, so now we're getting into like science fiction territory, right? The robots taking over the world.
It might sound like that, but the author actually argues that it's a possibility we need to consider, however unlikely it might seem.
Okay.
He says, a singleton is a single, coherent, and self-aware agent that controls all of the resources in a given domain. If a sufficiently powerful AI were to become a singleton, it could effectively control the future of human civilization.
Okay, so even if we don't think it's going to happen,
Right.
it still raises these really fundamental questions about, the relationship between humans and technology.
Absolutely. Like, if we're creating machines that are potentially smarter than us, how do we make sure they don't turn against us?
Right. How do we stay in control?
And those are tough questions, and I don't think anyone has the answers yet.
Yeah.
But the point is, we need to be having these conversations now,
Yeah.
involving everyone, ethicists, philosophers, social scientists, technologists.
To make sure that we're developing AI responsibly.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from this static utopia to an AI aristocracy to this almost unimaginable singleton scenario.
Right, a whole spectrum of possibilities.
Yeah, and I imagine some of our listeners might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
Oh, for sure.
Like, is there any hope?
But I think it's important to remember that the future is not set in stone.
Right.
We still have agency. We can make choices that will lead us towards a better outcome.
Absolutely, and that's really the point of this article, right?
Yeah, it's not meant to scare us. It's meant to wake us up.
Yeah, it's a call to action.
Exactly. We need to engage with these issues, ask the tough questions, and work together to create a future where AI is a force for good.
And for all of you out there in the social sciences, your expertise is more important now than ever.
Absolutely.
We need you to help us understand all of this.
Right. To design systems that work to make sure that this technology benefits everyone.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a mind-bending journey.
It has. But hopefully it's given you some food for thought and, maybe even inspired you to get involved in these conversations.
We need all hands on deck.
Absolutely. And we'll see you back here next time for another deep dive.